Hello, and welcome to another episode of Generally Speaking. I'm your host, Bill Lawrence. Today is Thursday, August 28th, 2025. So I like to talk about any and everything, whatever interests me. And so I'm going to start off with what I thought was a fascinating presentation about rubber. Rubber. Imagine that. Yes, and if you want to look this up after you hear from me, it's at a site called Veritasium, Veritasium, Veritasium. So look that up and look up rubber, and I'm sure you'll find it. I hope you'll find it. Any rate, so what about rubber? Well, this presentation started off just, saying the wonderful thing about rubber. Look at how it stretches, and why does it stretch? And they go on to this thing about molecules. Now, I don't even believe in molecules. I don't believe in atoms. And one of these days, I'll find someone to argue about it. In fact, I made a comment recently at another site I was watching that was just promoting science. They were talking about something in particular and said how this one experiment about the formation of the atomic model at that particular time and how it came about in the experiment that was done, and how this person said, "See, science. That's why I'm a science person." And I just totally laughed at it. I had to poke all the holes that were in that whole story, but I digress. So this person is explaining rubber going into molecules. Like, really, do I even need to? I don't care, why you think rubber stretches. But at any rate, they go into that. And so, what's so interesting about this anyway? Well, first of all, where it comes from a tree, and it was known by hundreds and hundreds of years ago in Central America. The Aztecs, Incas, or whoever those people were back there then, they knew about that stuff. They made use of it. They had sneakers. They actually, long before Michael Jordan, these people were running around with sneakers, so to speak. Well, it turns out this rubber. Oh, and by the way, the substance that comes out of the tree was called latex. We've all heard of latex. I always thought that was some more recent accomplishment, after rubber was developed and all its offshoots. But the original liquid out of the tree, latex. So, all right, there it is. It's rubber, but it's not the rubber that we have today. It had very limited properties. It still had stretchiness, but there were a lot of limitations to it. And it is well known, that it existed, but no one was doing anything about it until like the 1800s, when the possibilities were being explored for like rubber gloves and rubber boots and rubber raincoats and what other things we could do with it, except again it had limitations. So this fellow was experimenting with it, mixing different chemicals with it, heating it in different ways. This guy was going on and on with all his experiments, and this costs money, just to get the materials to keep it mixing, and just spending your time not having a job, just doing all of this. And he did so many combinations, a lot like Thomas Edison making all those filaments for his light bulbs until he finally found the one that worked. This fellow was going crazy working with rubber, and he had to borrow a lot of money to get it, and then he inevitably couldn't pay it back. Ended up going to debtor's prison, and came out and borrowed some more money. I don't know how these people kept lending it to him after he couldn't pay it back. I guess they kept thinking maybe something will come of this, and we'll get rich. So they kept lending him. He kept going back to debtor's prison again and again. He started calling it his second home. And any rate, in the end, he made some very interesting discoveries. But by the time he died, he still hadn't made anything out of it, and he was like thousands, hundreds of thousands in debt when he died. But his work was picked up and was carried on by another company that became very successful and decided to name themselves after this guy in honor of him. And you may have heard of the company. It's called Goodyear. So they make tires, and tires, of course, are on automobiles. And if there's one person who knew something about automobiles, that was Henry Ford. And Henry Ford was thinking, I got to what is the term? Something the market, corner the market. I have to really get a lockdown on this rubber stuff. So he decides to plant rubber tree plantations in Brazil, and he builds a whole city down there. Well, not a big city, but he builds a town just to take care of this rubber tree project that he's got going on. And it was really quite an amazing little town. He called it Fordlandia. And it had churches and it had schools and it had all the facilities you would want. It was like one of these ideal planned towns. It was ideal for the people he planted, but for the field workers that he had doing the work, actually sapping the trees and doing the hard manual labor, it wasn't such a paradise. It was actually more like a horror show, slave labor, like the visions of the sugar plantations where the slaves were just worked to death, essentially whipped and often burned alive by the furnaces and just horrors. And that was similarly what was going on with these rubber tree things. But whoever knew there was a whole town, and this story just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more crazy, all about the rubber, and like the properties of rubber. Do you know that um, airplane tires, specifically, they've got to mix different compounds for different effects? And what's the one of the effects you have to concern yourself with airplane jet craft tires? The fact that they go through such temperature changes, really, do they? Yes, because did you know when you're flying up at typical flight altitudes of, like, say, 35,000 feet or so, did you know that the temperature up there is like minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit? And I'm not a good changer into centigrade, but I think that's even further colder centigrade. But, whoa, cold, freezing. And rubber, when it gets cold, tends to just get hard and brittle and want to break. But if you mix it right, it lasts right. So, yeah, it gets very cold up there. But then on the other hand, when it comes down to ground and hits the ground, there is friction so hot that the thing goes up to 120 degrees. So this rubber has to go from minus 65 to 125 Fahrenheit. I'm sorry for you Celsius people. I deal with it. And any rate, so it was just entirely a totally fascinating story. I come across these stories sometimes that they start off being, nothing, who would think there's anything there, and they become such big stories. And while I'm thinking of it, I have to mention a book called Longitude. Longitude and latitude, those lines that go around the earth on those maps. And the idea of knowing where you are is kind of important, when you're sailing a ship or traveling anywhere. Now we have GPS, it's easy to know. But before then, you had to do one of those look up at the stars kind of things and figure out where you were. And in the early days of the ships that could cross the oceans, they were able to get a pretty good idea of left and right, east and west, where they were. But what was a problem was longitude, the up and down. So you might say you want to go to, Florida from Europe, and you might end up in Canada because you don't know you're up or you're down, or you might end up in South America. So longitude is an important thing to know. And there was this great story about the efforts to find a way to know what your longitude was, and it was actually done. It was focused on using clocks of all things, to know where you were with clocks. And I don't want to say how clocks do it, but there was a competition offered by the Royal Society in England to anyone who gets a device that can tell us what our longitude is at. That big money, something that would make everybody want to go after it. And there were some cutthroat people going after, this device. And this one fellow who is a clock genius. Some people, you could be good at this, good at that, or if maybe you're not special, but you put your effort to it and you become okay. But some people, they just have a knack. They just know it. Well, this one fellow making his clocks, the story was amazing. It actually had a preface by the first man to step on the moon. He was fascinated with these things, and has a preface by him, Armstrong, I think it was. And anyway, I'm getting off on here. So rubber, a big story, and I definitely recommend reading that book, Longitude. And so, yeah. Now, like I say, I'll watch any and everything. So another thing I was coming across was how we are surveyed. You know, how we are tracked. You know, everything we do is tracked, and it's very common knowledge now. Our cell phones are practically tracking devices. Not practically, they are tracking devices, and how all our information is collected. You know, our buying habits, what we watch, where we go, who our neighbors are, what our preferences are for anything. Well, this little video by Ben Jordan, and the title, if you look up Breaking the Creepy AI. This was a fascinating story. Like I said, I knew, we're being tracked. We can be tracked. This whole thing about privacy statements, they're a joke. Privacy is a joke. It's just a word they use, and has absolutely no meaning. I mean, we've got a company out now called Palantir that the government sponsors, which is all about collecting every little bit of information that can possibly be known about everyone and putting it together. But this story by Ben Jordan, um, it even knowing, yeah, we know all about it. Yeah, we know what the ending to the story is. This was still a fascinating story. It is absolutely fascinating. All right, so what else? Just again bouncing around on every kind of thing. A fellow named Chris Norland. Never met him before, but I was watching whatever it was. I didn't think the story itself merited much of a comment, but something he said I thought was very funny. He says, "Well, that's the intellect of the American people. You can easily distract them with shiny objects, like, for instance, no trans athletes in sports." And so he was making political commentary about some of the wild, crazy things that are going on. But, how easily the population can just be, well, look over here, that sleight of hand thing, you looking over here while they're pulling disasters over there. Yes, we're the intellect of the American people. But I would hazard to say it's not just the American people, it's people generally, will get suckered and easily manipulated, easily moved. And I was watching a video. This fellow was talking about Ukraine. He was going there to visit, and he was a podcaster that I like to watch. And he exhibits the fault that I see in a lot of my lefty podcasts favorites, that they're great on national politics, but they are pathetic on international. None of them seem to know anything about Ukraine except that it's being attacked, and that Russia attacked them, for no reason whatsoever, just because they're mad, because they just got expansionist, tendencies. And he'd gone to Ukraine. I guess a friend of his was telling him, "Listen, you got to come and visit. I got to show you what's going on here." And he was just talking about the energy and the resilience of these people, and it's really great to see how they're resisting this guy. And it was reminding me about how social creatures we are. That you're surrounded by people who are enthusiastic, that feel strongly about something, and it rubs off on you. And one of the places that I first noticed this is churches. I'm a non-believer myself, but I've had loved ones that go there, and I've gone with them, and I can certainly vouch for the energy that you feel when you've got all of these people there singing the praise, and you hear the cheering and the stories, and how you start thinking maybe there's something to this, maybe it's true, and it's because we're social people, and we get filled with the emotion. It's like when you're in a crowd and they're all yelling, "Yeah, get them!" or "Yes, this," or "Yes, that." You get filled with it, and unless you've developed a certain independence within yourself, that you can notice you're in the middle of this, and you can stay um, objective and not be hit with it. If you haven't gotten to that point, yes, you will be overwhelmed by it, and that's what this fellow was. He was overwhelmed by it. And I made a comment. I said, "Listen, fella, there are so many source of information out there about what is really going on in Ukraine, how this all came about. You really ought to read it. And any rate, so that was that. So uh, again, I'm bouncing around. I hope you're enjoying this because that's the purpose of this channel. It's not to be just on one boring topic, it's to be about all different things. And so I have to talk about a comedian. I love comedy. It's nothing like a good laugh. You know, you need a laugh now and then. So this young lady, her name is Atsuko Okatsuka. Any rate, so I just thought I could redo one of her skits. I mean, I'm not, in the studio on the stage, but it is still funny. She was talking about her uncle, asking her, how do you know not to lie or steal or murder if you don't read the Bible? And she pauses and says, "That's when I realized my uncle needs to keep reading the Bible because the only thing keeping him from lying, stealing, and murder is the Bible." And so it was very funny when I heard it. Maybe you can appreciate it now. So, any rate, let me keep going. Okay. Every now and then, I'll make a religious comment, and in doing so, I have to talk about my favorite show, Paul Logia, and this one fellow who was talking about being an apologist, which is someone who explains the reasons why you should believe. It's a strange word that we use, apology, which usually means to say I'm sorry, but it can also mean defending something. But this guy was saying instead of calling them an apologist, you should call them an excusagist. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm sorry if I offend any Christians. But any rate, so mifepristone. Now we're starting to get down to more political things. Mifepristone, called the morning after drug. So you've had sex, you were unprotected, and you're female, and you take this, and just in case, it will prevent an egg implanting and the fertilization process continuing. So we've got a politician somewhere who's making every effort in the world he possibly can to get mifepristone illegal, make it illegal. And there are gangsters in this world. We know there's good people and there's bad people, including just the isolated, thief who will stab you in the back for some money, or the organized crime. But they're not the majority of the population, thank goodness. Everybody around you isn't a murderer. But there is a level of people, just below that level that are willing to force themselves on you, and they don't care. They're going to force it on you. And you might want to try, say, listen, let's have a rational debate, let's talk about it, let's moderate. No, they don't want to. They're not going to moderate. They want what they want, and they're going to push it on you. And one of my favorite examples is the people that want to put the Bible in the and the Ten Commandments and the churches and the courtrooms. You don't need them. Those places function fine without them. But these people, suddenly they have to force it, and they're going to expend a huge amount of effort, and they're going to try their hardest to get it in there. And I had another example. I didn't want to just say, there's Bible people. There's all kinds of things you can try to push in this world, and some of these people will push it, and they'll push it hard. And at some points, there's nothing you can do about it except you have to take out a stick and come to blows. That's what the Civil War was about. It gets to a point where, that's what you get. So, at any rate, this fellow, he wants to stop mifepristone, and he's got a good shot at it since the couple of times that the mifepristone incident, subject thing, came to the Supreme Court. It was knocked down, but not because they didn't think there was anything negative about not allowing it, but more because there was some procedure wasn't right. But they indicated they're happy to do it. That's their inclination. They've already eliminated Roe v. Wade, so that's the boat they're on. And in any this guy, he is all into pushing this kind of thing. So that's what some people do. All right, what else? We got China's building a dam in Tibet, and what's the whole story about? The story is about they're thinking about infrastructure. They're thinking about ahead. They're planning. The whole. Well, what do you mean? A dam? Well, dams, of course, serve a purpose. They regulate water flow, but also they primarily produce electricity, and electricity is very important. Of course, China's also working on some other projects for producing electricity. And at any rate, the whole idea is they're working on it. And the concept of this story was that the United States is not. The United States is just working on financing, making deals with money and selling its weapons, selling its guns, and they're not really thinking about developing the country. And I certainly could agree with that. Although there are a lot of alternative energies being developed, and there are some states where the alternative energy, the wind power, and others, are significant, if not the larger part of the energy production. So, I mean, we're human. We're not all locked into one kind of mindset. So there are different things going on. But generally speaking, this idea of developing, of thinking about the country as a whole and where it's going and how it can, best be developed, doesn't happen in this country. It does happen in China. And so they're building this dam in Tibet, and this, made me think of something else. I've commented in the past about the U.S. is one of the most aggressive countries on the earth, and how we talk about China and Russia as the big enemies, and meanwhile they're not bothering anybody. We've attacked numerous countries and trying to overthrow, and China and Russia, they don't. I mean, you can point at Ukraine right now for Russia, but this thing with Tibet. I was looking up Tibet, and I said, "Why is China building something in Tibet? Isn't Tibet another country?" Well, sort of, or not. Actually, China did take them over, and this made brought me back to the idea that while China seems like a wonderfully developed country. It's got a lot of social services and schooling, healthcare. It's got a lot of good things, but it's still a repressive government in terms of you can't speak out, you can't have your own ways. And maybe some people could argue, look, if the end result is a thriving, successful society, maybe you shouldn't care. I just feel in my heart that that's not right. So, but at any rate, so China isn't completely innocent. So, is anybody completely innocent? No. But any rate, that's what I wanted to say about that. So, what's next? Oh, I'm going cruising my channels, and I came across this fella. His name is Butch Ware, Ware, and his name isn't actually Butch. That's like his nickname, but everybody calls him Butch. I think his name is Rudolph, but he's running for governor in California. And why do I even mention his name? Is because he's being outright anti-Zionist. He's outright against the genocide in Israel. When almost nobody, no politician is willing to even say that. You've got that mayoral candidate in New York, Zoran Mamdani, and now you've got this fellow. I mean, for that alone, for not, oh yeah, let's add Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's also in there now. I just opened my wallet and I threw him $10. I don't have a lot of money to throw around. I live on Social Security, so but I give when I can. And Butch Ware for governor. I don't know what all else his other priorities are. Sometimes you have to pick which ones are the most important to you. Right now, that's the most important to me. I mean, just because all these people are getting killed, but not just that, just not being a slave of APAC, not being a slave to Israel. That's crazy when you see all of our representatives going to Israel and praying at the wall. This really kills me. They'll even put those yarmulkes on their heads. Why would a Christian, put a yarmulke on their head, pray at the wall like they're Jewish? The Jews killed Jesus. The Jews don't believe Jesus is a prophet. Not only that, but the Israelis attack Christians in Israel. And why would these, they're all Christians going over there, these politicians, and they'll put on a yarmulke and start praying at the wall. Um, Gets me. All right. So maybe it's all that money they get. Yeah, that could have something to do with it. All right, here's a story. I like to watch the police channels and the how the offenses are. And there was a story about a SWAT team had a tank, um, and they had targeted a house for whatever they were, going to conduct their business, and barged in, wrecked the place, $20,000 worth of damage. Ooh, wrong house, wrong house. So sorry. Have a nice day. And not going to pay for it. That's the attitude of these governments. The attitude of the city and the police force. We don't have to pay. We're in the course of our normal business. Yeah, it was a mistake. So sorry about that. Just the way it goes. We don't want to. Well, there was a big outcry. This one particular channel. I wish I could remember the name now to give you the name. There was a couple out there that follow these things, and they made a video of it, and so many people that watch it, like myself, complained and rose a ruckus that the town finally had to do something about it. Said, "Oh, we're sorry. We're going to pay for it all, and we'll all make nice, and we're sorry, and please don't bother us anymore." But that's what it is. It comes only when there's all this outrage. And it happens often. Again, I can't say it enough. We need so many changes. Let's take when they tow you away, and they shouldn't have towed you away. They pulled you at the side of the road. They don't like the way you look at them, and they say, "Well, you're under arrest." All right, they put handcuffs on you, put you in the car. Where's your car? It's just sitting at the side of the road. Well, it's not going to sit there forever. If someone steals it, it's gone. Or someone very likely might take your tires if it's there long enough. But even if neither of those happen, the city will tow your car, put it in the impound. And now let's say, okay, you got released. You shouldn't have been arrested in the first place, but off you go. All right, off I go. Where's my car? Over there. $80, please. Sorry. So now you didn't do any crime, but now you've got to pay for your car. And then what happens if they took you into jail on a Friday night and there's no court business going on for the weekend? You're there for 3 days. Your car's there for 3 days. Now you've got, a $250 bill you have to pay. You shouldn't have to pay anything if your car is towed and you weren't found guilty of anything. I mean, personally, I'm being generous. I think you shouldn't have to pay anything if they tow your car. It's not your fault that your car is in there. So, another thing I think needs to be changed. So, what's the last thing on my list? Nvidia. I was watching a thing about Nvidia stocks and the impact it has on the stock market, generally speaking. And this one story was really focusing on Trump's meddling with Nvidia and with corporations generally, and Nvidia's chips. They're one of the premier producers of high-end chips that are capable of super intelligent AI functionality that we normally don't sell to anybody else because then they get our advantage. We want to have the advantage. But Trump said, you know what, Nvidia, if you give me 15% of the profits, then you can sell it to China. So great, China can take it and work it into their AI computer systems and have just as much an advantage, or well, let's say, achieve parity. And so this was the story that I was reading, but I wanted to just comment more on how if Nvidia stock goes up or goes down, the impact it has on other tech stocks around it. And it's just to say again how stocks are a crazy kind of thing, because someone here does good or does bad. Now suddenly these people over there do good or bad. And it's not because there's any connection. It's because people just said, "Oh my, things are going bad. Sell, sell, sell. We got to sell our tech stocks." The stock market, as I've heard before, is nothing but a roulette wheel game. It's just a big casino. It's not attached to anything in reality. It's just a crap game. So, anyway, there we go. It's I always come out doing these things about the same amount of time. I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed doing it. One of these days, I'll get good enough to figure out how to put a splash logo on top, and even figure out how to adjust this camera so I can be, further back away. But for now, this is what you've got. I hope you liked and subscribed. Oh, I should have said that at the beginning. And make a comment. I could use a comment. Say, good show, boy, good show. and have a nice day.